And joining us in studio, Zizi Court was ANC National Spokesperson. He'll join us in a bit. We believe he's on his way. And Mosire Tsiane is from the South African Liberty Foundation as the chairperson there. Dr. Jackie Cilliers, Executive Director for the Institute for Security Studies. Professor Sipho Siepe, political analyst, joining us. And Jack Bloom, DA spokesperson for health. And Naran Singh, IFP Chief Whip. And we have from COPE as well. We have a guest there. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. We have quite a packed panel, so we'll try and get through the issues as quickly as possible. Mr. Tsiane, just from the South African Liberty Foundation, and I don't know when it comes to military precision, when it comes to ceremonial events around Parliament, is this for you the first that you've heard objection when it comes to primarily having the Defence Force and the Army and the required security around this event?
It's actually laughable that your army can be in a question. I mean, who does question the presence of their army? The army are there to protect all of us. After all, our sovereignty depends on them. They protect us inside and outside of this country. Anyone who feels threatened by the army, are they South Africans? That's a question we should ask, because these are the resemblance of who we are. These are nothing else but our guardian protectors in all the respects. They fight wars for us all over Africa in order to maintain peace, to assist peace. Least of all you can complain about the presence of the army anywhere else within the Parliament of South Africa.
Yeah.
I find it very laughable that you can have anyone reacting to the presence of the army, wanting to know why the police are there, when we should be calling for them in any event.
Mind you, it was also not a spontaneous reaction, if you will, to President Jacob Zuma delivering Sona 2017. I mean, the DA were very organized in terms of their flags and the banners. Remember the 94 Esitimeni calling for a moment of silence, which in itself was against the parliamentary rule, because an opening of parliament, they would do that anyway. And secondly, the fact that the EFF were just one after the other orchestrated in just not getting the Sona underway. Can one say that this is carefully, or it's like a master plan of the opposition to disrupt Sona in future?
Actually, my colleague raised a very interesting point, because everywhere in the world, I mean, in the US, in the UK, when you talk about the military, they will say these are the best of us. So there's always a positive relation with the military. It's not an anti-militarist posture that people are putting across. And I think we need to understand that the military are the only people in the world who are employed, and they also understand that they will be dying for their country. So the language that has emerged is also to demean that profession, that patriotism that they represent. So that's the first thing. But the issue of the State of the Nation address, I think the president spelled out what our challenges are. And I think in this country we all agree what those challenges are. The whole notion of triple challenge of inequality, poverty, and unemployment is something that is not debatable. And I would have thought that people and parties will be saying, how do we get out of this? But what you seem to get is a whole obsession with an individual rather than an obsession with society, with coming up with better ideas. The ANC president and the ANC have put in on the table that this is how we think we can move forward. So what you'd expect the opposition to do is to say, yes, we hear you, but we don't think your program will work for the following reason. And then when you do that, you are building. But we have reached a stage where there's an intellectual cul-de-sac, where parties seem to be unable to come up with better ideas rather than to express how much they hate a certain person. And I think we should go beyond that. We should actually be thinking about how are we going to address the real concerns of the people on the ground. This is what the State of the Nation is supposed to do. But what I heard today was an opportunity to hurl insults. I mean, some parties have mastered the art of sound bites, and they think coming up with sound bites is an argument, when in fact it is not. It is actually poverty of the ideas, it's actually bankruptcy. So
but
I hope we can go
but
beyond.
those sound bites have actually become, in the public domain, concrete evidence. You know, the mere slander where you can say this president is paranoid, there's an ANC that doesn't care, and everything that's pretty much been done over the past 23 years has culminated in corruption and et cetera, that this is a state it wasn't a state of the nation, but, you know, an enemy of the nation, as it were. It feeds into that narrative.
Well, negativity, as my colleague would say, is the manner in which the opposition party seems to be finding a rather flourishing from. They're not addressing the South Africa positive response. They're not addressing us in a way forward of the future. How do we get there? How do we move from where we are? We're in a constant state of poverty, particularly black people. We are, since 1994, post-1994, pre-1994, we're still in the same situation as we find ourselves to have been. Now, to always look at the negativity, I mean, we've crossed this line a long time ago. The Nkandla issue has been addressed in court. What more is there in relation to the president? You call him a crook, you say this one is a tsotsi, that one is a... How does it help us? How does it move forward? Now, what the EFF is doing is not helping South Africa. Everything that is there, we thought that it will be addressed in our courts. Civilized manner in addressing any other problems that we might have. Fine, we have the Constitutional Court to do that. Matter has been referred to that. Now, what more are you... What is there? It's actually saying to us that even in next year, expect the drama. There will always be something else to find so that you can disturb this Sona, that the president must not address us in a peaceful manner. Even if we have the most peaceful year with no scandal or any other issue, but be rest assured, we will be having EFF all the way through. So it's not building our country. In actual fact, truth be told, look what is now starting to do. We cannot ignore the reaction that for the first time in this generation, or rather in this democracy, we see people in soccer matches reacting this way. Why do they get the influence from? This is the same behavior that you see that people are now saying this is the new rule of law, or is the new rule of South Africa. If you differ, if you are defeated either in soccer, in a parliament and debates, resort to violence. It cannot be correct.
All right, Retsiane, we do have Mr. Jack Bloom, DA spokesperson for Health. Mr. Bloom, thanks so much. Good evening to you and welcome to the show. I'm not sure if you're privy to previous comments or remarks from our panelists regarding the grandstanding, as some have called it, of the DA and in support of the EFF provoking the parliamentary security to take action. The DA in themselves being disruptive and missing the opportunity to engage in a meaningful way, rather, in the processes of Parliament. Your reaction?
Well, I think that's absolute nonsense, of course. I think this accusation of grandstanding, you know, I was accused of grandstanding when I asked the question, how many of the psychiatric patients died, and I was given this terrible answer of 36. So it's a standard ANC accusation that DA or other parties are grandstanding. It's when they've been caught out. And I think what's happened in Parliament, I think really to have security forces in Parliament, security personnel, I think just says it all. This is a president who does not have the respect of the country, and I think that the ANC needs to take a hard look at themselves. They should listen what opposition parties say. You know, the DA, we have our own particular stance in how we oppose the ANC. Obviously, the EFF does things differently. But I really think that, you know, as our leader, Muzi Maimane, you know, said today in Parliament, he pointed out very clearly what is facing the country. The president has lost the trust of the nation. You know, hopefully, you know, the ANC needs to take a hard look at itself, and the problem starts at the top. The problem starts with President Jacob Zuma, who has broken the Constitution. That's, you know, what the public protector has said, and he's still ducking and diving while there is supposed to be a process of investigation and sanctions. And of course, the president is famous for stalling things in the court, 783 charges of corruption. It'll catch up eventually. So it's typical of the ANC to go on the attack in this matter, but really they are failing this country, and that's undeniable.
All right, Mr. Bloom, just stay on the line. We have Zizi Kodwa in studio, but before we go there, we'll go to Mr. Naran Singh, the IFP Chief Whip. Mr. Singh, good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. The behavior in Parliament really doesn't give much a sense of an organized working National Assembly if disagreements turn out in this manner. Just your view in how your constituents and your voters ought to look at Parliament as a collective.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy, and good evening to your viewers, and thank you for the opportunity. I think if those that heard our leader, Prince Buthelezi, speak today, he condemned what happened in Parliament last week. But he also, at the same tone, said, where do we go to from here? Obviously, some of the criticism by the opposition parties was and is amply justified, but we've got to charter a way forward, and I think his speech today, his response to Sona, was in that direction. Where do we go to? How do we resolve the problems? We've got to come together and put the country first. But at the same time, we can't have government and the ANC making promises which they cannot fulfill. We've had that in the past. We don't want that to perpetuate itself in the future. And we're all patriotic South Africans, as he said. And let's come together and see how we can resolve some of these issues.
Yeah, Mr. Singh, sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We just want to clarify the issue of the militarization of Parliament, in the sense that, there were police patrolling around the precinct and Parliament Avenue. There were snipers, or whether, in your experience as a member of Parliament, whether this is untoward. Has there been excessive or over capitalization of security in Parliament this time around?
Yeah, I've been around long enough to know that what happened this year was unprecedented in terms of the number of security personnel. And this is something we need to look at. We also need to look at whether or not armed people from the Defence Force and policemen were within the precincts of Parliament without the authority of presiding officers. Because if that happened, then the Minister of Defence needs to answer to the country. But if it was under the authority of the presiding officer, then they need to answer to Parliament and to us as members of Parliament, because that should not happen.
All right, Mr. Singh, thanks so much. Zizi Kodwa joins us now. Earlier on, Mr. Bloom was saying that it is typical, good evening, by the way, it is typical of the ANC to always resort to accusations, etc. The points that they brought in Parliament are valid, and time will catch up with the party.
No, I think firstly, happy Valentine's to you.
Thank you.
It's not a coincidence of history that you see that kind of a behavior. If you look back in terms of what happened in 2014, just before elections, there are a number of parties that made public pronouncement as a new government incoming. And clearly, when all those parties were rejected by the electorate, it was clear to us that Parliament is another site of struggle. And I think the very first sitting, the indication was very clear, that they will make sure that the majority, which is the African National Congress, will not have time to communicate the mandate upon which it was elected by the people of South Africa. What you saw on Thursday, it was not coincident of history. It was well orchestrated by the unholy alliance of DA and EFF, primarily to make a point that the majority, an elected government, a legitimate government, must not communicate to the South African population. And therefore they failed to do so, including people who complain and make noise about the presence of police. It's people who've got bad intentions. People who don't have any bad intentions do not have problems, because you must remember, soldiers for ceremonial guards have been there before. Probably the issues of numbers is an issue that even the Parliament have explained. But it's only people with bad intentions. Those bad intentions have now been exposed, that the intention was to collapse. We're quite proud by the bold pronouncements by the President, in line with our 12th urgent task in terms of overarching message of radical economic transformation. We think that the President has communicated a clear message, but we must expect more Because by talking about radical economic transformation, we have touched the nerve of South Africa's economy. White males who control majority of stakeholders and sectors that we continue to talk about, and they'll continue to make this noise, including using some of the Manchingilanes we've seen who represent political parties, and yet they become a mouthpiece of the monopoly capital.
All right, but what's your response when it comes to the criticism that the men in white shirts were carrying cable ties, and there was alleged biological chemicals, to subdue the opposition, as it were?
Well, what happened in Parliament on Thursday, I think is regrettable. And I think the fact that Parliament has already undertaken a process of probing some of the incidents is something that is welcomed, including a possibility to lay criminal charges against people who wear makarapas and use makarapas as weapons against other members of Parliament, including against the security in Parliament. They must lay charges. I can see the diversion of people going to Concord, but the reality is that people have acted in a manner that is criminal in Parliament, and Parliament must protect its dignity in a manner that it should use its authority and power and lay charges against those who actually did things that undermine the decorum of Parliament.
Okay, let's also have Mr. Pakes Dikgetsi, National Chairperson for the Congress of the People. Thanks so much, Dikgetsi, for your time and just your experience in Parliament. We were there as well. We just want to get a sense of whether you felt it was heavily militarized over and above what generally happens in light of this caliber of event.
Yes, good evening, and good evening to the listeners. Yes, as Congress of the People, we have expressed our view that, in fact, the presence of, the security forces, the securitization of Parliament during the Sona was rather, Parliament went overboard, or the police went overboard, and it was rather unacceptable in a democracy. The courts of our land have previously ruled on these issues, and it is clear that somehow the presiding officers and the ruling party will not respect the spirit and the letter of the rulings of our courts regarding how Parliament in a democracy ought to be functioning. And so indeed, as a Congress of the People, we are quite disappointed and totally shocked to have seen what happened during the Sona.
All right, just hold on the line, Zizi, the overinvestment in security. Maybe we'll start with Professor Siepe. Please stay on the line.
I think the first thing that we should say is that there is an understanding that there is a way in which Parliament conducts its affairs. And if things are normal, we should not actually be needing anybody to police anyone. So we should go to the core of the problem. We cannot sit here and pretend that there is no chaos. We cannot sit here and pretend that the right of certain people to speak is undermined, and the right of many millions of South Africans to hear the president is also undermined. So we must start first to say, how do we find a way in which we can disagree very strongly without disrupting and without undermining other people's rights? And the second thing, which is unfortunate, and one will say, given our history of where military force was used, we do not expect the democratic government to do that. But what I'm uncomfortable with is also to begin to position the military as an enemy of the people. The military is there to protect us. And like I said, anywhere in the world, especially the democratic world, they will always say, these are the people who are willing to die for their country. So we need to respect that. But at the same time, we must address the core of the problem. But what we have done now, we have sidetracked from the issues that affect the people in this country. As this was putting it, that we have a challenge where the majority of people who are affected by unemployment, the majority of people who are landless, are black people. And there is a program. So if the DA has an agenda that is better, that will address the triple challenge, let's talk about that. But what you have is that it appears that some of the parties, they only have one agenda, And that agenda is not the people of this country. It is an individual. So I'm simply saying you can criticize the person, but let's do it in such a way that we also build a country. I'm looking forward to a situation where South Africans can proudly say we can differ, but our difference is about taking our people forward. But when you have sustenance of poverty, of inequality, and of racism and white supremacy,
sorry, Professor
it can't be right.
We're seriously running out of time. Just as your reaction from comments made so far, and primarily earlier on, you did say that this, in your view, is to subvert, or rather, to try and circumvent what is the actual issues in the country.
The other parties have got nothing to offer to South Africans. And therefore, they will do everything to undermine the party that has been elected overwhelmingly to provide what the millions of South Africans, they were looking at the president. The president is not a President Zuma state of the nation address. It's an opportunity as a president on behalf of an elected government, legitimate government, to talk to millions of South Africans. Their right was violated. It was clear now, we know, that there was a clear agenda, orchestrated plan between the unholy alliance of DA and EFF to collapse the state of the nation address, and thereby denying the right of millions of South Africans to listen from there. Whether we agree with President Zuma, it's neither here nor there, but he's a head of state. On behalf of government, he must speak and present to millions of South Africans who are looking forward of what is it that the president and his government are doing to change the lives of ordinary South Africans. But they failed, but they will continue to fail and do whatever they will do, because they've got nothing to offer to South Africa except to undermine the very same democracy and the constitution.
And let's look at the processes as well. What is Parliament to do and the speakers to do if there is general disregard for the ethic or the code of ethics in the House, if there's foul language being used and complete disrespect for one another? Or should they not be removed then if they cause disruption, Mr. Tsian?
Well, it's obvious that the opposition that we have surely don't have an interest of listening to the President of South Africa. The Speaker have no option but to remove them. What option is there left? Let them disrupt and disrupt and disrupt. They're not disrupting the President, they're disrupting us, South Africans. We want to hear what are the plans for this country. Every year, the President presents us with a yearly plan. He presents us to where South Africa needs to be going. This disruption are disturbing all of us. And what option is there left for the Speaker? What options?
Yeah, and just in closing, the responses, of course, the debate today, primarily we saw with the DA presenting their alternative plan to take the country.
We're quite happy. We're quite happy that the ANC MPs in particular, they were not defocused. They remain on, they did not return insults with insults. They focus on the work that we have done in terms of advancing the objectives of the National Development Plan, making sure that going forward we improve the lives of our people, including the work that we have done in a number of areas to improve the lives of our people. We would have seen Kukilenkwinti, for example, talking about issues of rural development in a very choreographed way, storytelling of how that department has improved the lives of ordinary people. And this is what the ANC MPs must continue to do, because the strategy here is that we must not communicate the work we do, including the successes. We must talk to our people through the platform in Parliament. That is an institution of the People's Parliament. That's why it's important that we must use that platform to communicate the work and the mandate that has been given to us through the manifesto of 2014.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Zizi Kodwa, national spokesperson for the ANC, Professor Sipho Siepe, political analyst, Mosiri Tsiane, the South African Liberty Foundation chairperson, Mr. Jack Bloma, the DA spokesperson for health, thanks indeed, and Pax Dikhetsi, national spokesperson for COPE. And if I've missed anyone, it's really regrettable. But thanks indeed for joining us. We're back after this.